Hi, Wellness Big Sisters, and welcome back to the Wellness Big Sister podcast. Today we've got a part 2 on our spring cleaning series, and this will drop a little bit before our newsletter goes out for this spring cleaning segment, let's call it. But the first one, which went out in April, was about spring cleaning for our bodies, right? Applying the concept of spring cleaning that's all the rage come, spring of each year, cleaning out our closets, detoxifying our skincare, ingredients, like cleaning ingredients around the house, all of that sort of stuff, like basically spring cleaning, but now applying that concept to our body, our movements, our lymphatic system, and all of that. So we cover that in part 1, which will be the episode just before this. So if you want a little bit of a refresher or you didn't quite get to listen to that one, take a look there. We also have the spring cleaning part 1, all about the lymphatic system, on the Wellness Big Sister blog that just sort of puts it in written form and expands upon it a little bit more than probably like the more sciencey type of stuff and the actual terminology than what we probably do here in this podcast. So that was part 1. We also went over a body scan, and again, I have the links to the lymphatic massage, the body scan, all of the free things to help our lymphatic system, our body's ability to detox, in part 1. So part 2, we're talking about our brain, right? Spring cleaning for our brain, and a lot of that revolves around basically the lymphatic system, but for our brain. So our brain's sort of detoxification system, cleansing system, how waste gets moved out of our brains, the importance of moving that waste out of our brains, all the things. So it's a packed episode, and I will say this is a relatively new topic actually. So this system, the brain detoxification system, is called the glymphatic system. So it's a combination of sort of the types of cells that are involved in the brain, glial cells, mixed with lymphatics, right? So the fluid movement throughout the brain that helps to move waste, collect proteins and different sort of pathogens in the brain, and then move them down into the lymphatic system and then the circulatory system. So glymphatic system is what this one's called. And it's a relatively new discovery. Only about 2012, since about 2012, have we been actually like calling it the glymphatic system and realizing that there is actually a lymphatic system for our brain. So relatively new. A lot of the brain, I think about the brain as like the ocean, right? A lot of people say, and I'm no marine biologist, but a lot of people say the ocean, like we don't know like 10% of what we know about the ocean. I'm just throwing that number out there. That's not accurate. But, we know very little about the ocean, the depths of the ocean, and we've explored very little of the ocean. The brain's pretty similar to me for the human body, where we know very little about the brain. We're figuring new things out every day. So this glymphatic system being, found in about 2012 is still a relatively new thing. And there's a lot of different cellular types that might play a role, that people are hypothesizing play a role, that they'll probably come out, 10 years or so, who knows, 5 years, maybe they're all working on it right now anyways, but it'll come out with more information. So this is just what we have right now. And again, just sort of an umbrella overview of the glymphatic system. And what I really want to sort of hone in on is the importance of this system. I don't want you to skip out on this, because I feel like, again, like the lymphatic system of our body, right? It's like the one everyone forgets, but super important. Same with the glymphatic system in our brain, right? Because a lot of these neurodegenerative diseases, think Parkinson's, ALS, concussions, like traumatic brain injury, which concussions are under that category of traumatic brain injury. So if you've had a concussion, sports concussion, this is a super important episode for you too. No matter if it was years ago, car accidents, right? Any sort of whiplash, concussion, like all of these sort of neurological diseases. Did I say Alzheimer's? Alzheimer's is an important one too, right? So it all boils down to our brain's ability to clear out these sort of plaques that build up, or these proteins and proteins that we don't want building up in our brain. It all comes down to this glymphatic system. So it's super duper important for us for just long term, right? And just how healthy we're able to keep our brains, and how functional we're able to keep our movements, because again, Parkinson's, movement is affected with that, right? It's not just your brain. Same with Alzheimer's and ALS especially. So all of these concussions, like reaction time, all of these things also affect movement. So keeping our brain healthy and optimizing this glymphatic system is super important for just our long-term brain health, right? So I think that's why we often miss like the important part. So I wanted to start off there because, again, I don't want you to skip this episode, because I do think that it is super beneficial and a system that not a lot of us have heard of, right? So again, we always start a little bit more on the sciencey anatomy aspect. And since the glymphatic system, we covered the lymphatic system in spring cleaning part 1. So you can go over that episode again, but I'll try and link a lot of the components. So like the lymphatic system in our bodies, we have lymph fluid for our body. We have what we call cerebrospinal fluid for our brain and spinal cord area. And cerebrospinal fluid acts in a lot of different ways, but it helps to cushion our, it kind of floats, right? It allows our brain and our spinal cord to sort of float in and not jut up against the structure that surrounds it, right? Whether it's our skull or our vertebral column. So it helps with that, but it also helps with transportation of various nutrients and waste products throughout. So the CSF, we can link back to like lymph basically in our lymphatic system. And CSF, it has some pathways of travel throughout our brain, right? But one of the most recent discoveries and one of the coolest discoveries is that it travels along like near some of our arteries that dive deep into the brain. And so what happens is this cerebrospinal fluid travels with those arteries deep in the brain to pick up all of the waste products that are made from all of these different neurons in our brain, right? So all of these different metabolic products and metabolic waste that happens from these processes that go on throughout our brain. But since our brain is like so, I'm using my hands a lot, but basically it's so woven together, and if you've seen it, there's a lot of different crevices. And so the cerebrospinal fluid actually has a pathway to help get into those crevices and really clear out and almost act like a hose to sort of push those waste products further along towards and near the venous system. So the system that sort of helps bring that deoxygenated blood back to the heart, right? And so it flows into these perivenous spaces is what they're called. That's where the CSF sort of brings all of these waste products and pathogens and plaquey buildups and all of that into this perivenous space, and it runs along with the venous system, and then it'll either get deposited back into our lymphatic system in the body or also travel with our venous system back into the circulatory system. And a lot of people, so you might be asking, just as I did, right? Like, what are the lymph nodes of the lymphatic system? What are those TSA pre-check points? And if you're unfamiliar with the terminology that I'm using, I link lymph nodes to TSA pre-check or TSA stations because they're sort of the checkpoint. They sort of manage all that waste. And it's really unclear on what structures actually help with that in the brain. It does happen to an extent. So there's certain areas that people are hypothesizing help with that. There's different cells that people are hypothesizing with that, but there's no necessarily clusters that they found like lymph nodes in the brain. So one of the differences, I guess, but it basically moves it all the way down, deposits all the waste products into the lymphatic system with the fluid as well, and then sort of moves it along back into our circulatory system to kind of maintain again that fluid balance. And so it's sort of a similar process, and it joins in with that lymphatic system as well. But the really cool thing about our brain is that it does go, in our lymphatic system specifically, is that it does go deep into those crevices to really sort of weed out all those little, I don't know, I picture them like weeds, right? Like all those little weedy proteins and pathogens and plaques that build up in our brain that need to be cleared out and flushed out. So the other thing to note about the lymphatic system is that it is most active during sleep. So a lot of our sort of actionable items that we're going to take away from this episode involve sleep hygiene and making sure that we're getting enough sleep, and most importantly, deep sleep. So our lymphatic system, and again, there's different hypotheses for why our lymphatic system is most active during sleep. A lot of it comes back to our ability to pump more fluid throughout the brain and have that sort of pressure gradient when we're sleeping. There's a larger sort of amplitude of sort of this pumping motion that allows more fluid to sort of be pumped into some of those spaces. That's one of the hypotheses. It's most active during deep sleep. So that's the important part. And so anything involved in sleep hygiene and making sure that we get the right amount of sleep, the right quality of sleep, we're going through all these phases is super duper important. So as far as sort of ways to help our lymphatic system, a lot of the same things apply with our lymphatic system, right? So a lot of just making sure that fluid's moving along, making sure we're staying hydrated, all of these things. But for the glymphatic system in particular, and honestly all systems, but since we're just talking about spring cleaning for our brains, the glymphatic, it's super important to get that sleep. And again, I mentioned that a lot of those neurodegenerative diseases can come from buildups of different plaques and proteins in our brain. And so this glymphatic system, as a way to sort of hose it all off and push those guys out of there, helps to clear it out and reduce our risk for things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and different diseases that might be related to sort of these increased amount of proteins or plaque buildups within our brain and spinal cord. So sleep, super duper hugely important. If you didn't believe it already, like add this to the list, right? Because I think most people know, but a few things that I wanted to sort of check in with myself on my own sort of like spring cleaning, but for my brain health and primarily my sleep routine, right? I want like good sleep hygiene and good spring cleaning for my sleep routine. So I took myself through a lot of these checklists, and it'll be mentioned on the Wellness Big Sister blog, but I wanted to see like, okay, am I getting myself enough time or giving myself enough time to get to bed on time, fall asleep on time, wake up on time to get the amount of sleep that I need to go through all of those REM, light sleep, deep sleep cycles, right? So we want to be able to give our brains enough time to get through all of those cycles in order to get all of the healing benefits and all of the good glymphatic benefits from that spring cleaning for our brain, right? So are our wake and sleep times and our ability to wind down at night giving us the appropriate, like allowing us the appropriate time to fall asleep, right? If you, for example, sometimes, I'll get up at like 5:40 sometimes. So that means I need to be asleep by 9:40, right? If my alarm's going to go off at 5:40. And ideally, my body's able to just kind of naturally weave in and out of that, where the alarm's not supposed to necessarily wake you out of sleep, but I have patience. So I do have to have that safety net a little bit. But if you are more of if you have the ability to sort of ease in and out of your workday, are you going to bed and winding down and allowing yourself enough time to fall asleep and then get that recommended amount of sleep and a healthy amount of sleep for your body, right? So check in with yourself on that and like, okay, if I'm going to bed at 9:40 and waking up at 5:40, I'm not necessarily like giving myself that time to sort of wind down too. So over the last week or so, I've been really trying to hone in on that sort of sleep routine and making sure I'm giving my body enough time to be able to wind down and actually fall asleep. And that's when that recommended sleep, like 8, 7, 10, 9 hours, whatever your body needs. The other thing, workouts. So because a lot of my patients start pretty early, I love morning workouts. Like morning workouts are what I would do if given the option, but I'm not waking up with a 4 on the clock. I know some of you guys might, and that's awesome. Awesome. Props to you guys. But I have to do more of the afternoon, evening workouts. And so am I giving my body enough time to get back into that parasympathetic state, that resting state after the workout so that my heart rate's not elevated, my breathing rate's not elevated. And I'm not even talking about an hour before bed. I'm thinking like 2 to 3 hours before bed, right? To really give my body time to ramp down out of that sort of heightened state with a workout. So I've had to check in a lot with myself with the workouts. The other thing, meal times and snack times. So I know with the time change, I'm in Austin, Texas, so we switch our clocks with the spring time change. And so it was probably like 2 weeks before my husband and I actually ate dinner, like before 8 p.m. And I'm maybe even 8:30. Like it was late because the sun sets so late, which I love, but my meal times were so messed up and my digestion was so messed up. Like I noticed my sleep significantly impaired during that time because my stomach was still digesting, right? Like my body was still working on breaking down this food or utilizing it for energy, and I was expecting myself to go to sleep. So my sleep was significantly impaired during that time. But now I've been trying to prioritize, like, okay, let me get the mealtime in well enough in advance that my body can wind down. And again, it's still a work in progress. I'm not perfect at this at all, but it's been a recent challenge of mine that I don't remember during the last time change stuff. So I don't know what happened, but meal times are something that I am working on. The other thing too is I heard on the Huberman Lab podcast, of course, like he's really big on morning sunlight. And so Morning sunlight helps to set your circadian rhythm for you to wind down appropriately at night too. So even getting up and having that sunlight, if your schedule allows, for those of you guys who work in healthcare or have early morning sports before school starts or whatever it is, like if you can't get it, because I can't wake up with sunlight either, but if you're able to, trying to get morning sunlight first thing in the morning to really help set that routine up so where you're able to get to bed in time. Again, but it starts the night before. What do they say? Like healthy habits start in the grocery store or something. Like you plan your outfits the night before, like same reason, right? If you're expecting yourself to get good sleep that night, start off with morning sunlight to really cue your circadian rhythm on the right track to where by the time you're winding down in bed at night, all of the processes that need to happen intermittently throughout the day in kind of waves have all happened to where you're able to wind down at night, right? If that makes sense. So morning sunlight's super important. And again, everyone always talks about blue light or work or mental work. So I'll group it all in with just sort of, computer light, blue light, or any sort of mentally stimulating activity. A lot of the time I'm working into the night or whatever, which I absolutely love it, but that means my mind's racing, my brain's racing. And so trying to wind those tasks down earlier in the night. And again, I know we've all heard this, but this sort of spring cleaning brain style is a nice way to sort of check in on our own patterns and like get really brutally honest, right? Wake sleep times, I realized I was going to bed closer to that 9:35. I'm like, oh, I'm in bed by 9:40. Like I'll be able to get up at 5:40. But by the time I got to bed, it was 10:40, right? So I'm already missing that. So just pay extra attention to these things. I know there are a lot of the things that we all know about, but I will say one of the things that has significantly helped me with my sleep in general is my Aura Ring, which it's charging right now, so it's not actually on, but I love it. It helps to again, and maybe it's not perfect, but it helps me to get a good range of okay, when was I in deep sleep? When was I in light sleep? When was I in REM sleep? Like all of these sleep metrics, how long it checks trends, which is absolutely incredible. Like it checks resting heart rate, which again is a good sign of a good health measurement to just keep track of, right? And so it can check that my sleep, I'm trending upward or I'm getting an average of, I think my spring thing just came up today actually where they do a quarterly report on and I think I was averaging 7 hours and 47 minutes, or 7 hours 23, I don't know, something not bad though. So I want to get that closer to what I actually think I need, but I love the Aura Ring as a tool for that. So if you're on the fence, I highly, highly, highly recommend. I absolutely love the Aura Ring, and I will be I don't know. The only thing I don't like is that it looks kind of manly, but I'm thinking of doing a ring stack. So side note, if you've found a way to make the Aura Ring look feminine on sort of I don't know, I have such stubby fingers that it just doesn't look good on me. So if you found a way, please let me know because I would love it because I absolutely love it as a fitness tracker. So sleep, super duper important, and getting good deep sleep is super duper important and a super actionable way that we can help our glymphatic system and spring cleaning for the brain. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, this spring cleaning series. I realized I was only going to make 2 parts, but I realized there's so many other things I want to talk about too that just didn't fit into the body or the brain. So now I'm thinking the next few will be emotional health, mental health, all of the more spring cleaning to help our mindsets, right? Not necessarily brain health, even though it does go into that, but more of a dopamine detox, social media stuff, body confidence, all of these things that I've really tried to check in on myself this spring. So that should be coming because I wanted to include it in this one as far as brain health, but it really didn't fit well with all of this sciencey actual brain stuff. So sleep, again, all the water stuff, all the good stuff we talked about with spring cleaning for the body, but now for the brain and especially adding that sleep hygiene in. So again, I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. We do have a YouTube channel. So if you want to subscribe there, it's under mine, but it has all the podcasts on it. So it's under the Dr. Kelsey Vick YouTube channel, but I'll have all the podcasts videoed, the podcast playlist. So I am obsessed with slicked back buns and have been for like whenever they came in style, like 2 or 3 years ago. So I was even thinking, I was like, I feel like I'm looking very ballerina-esque today during this podcast. So if you want to actually watch it and see how ballerina-esque it is, check out the YouTube, especially if you like watching some of the podcasts instead of just listening. But thank you guys for joining, and I look forward to the next podcast. And I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. And I'll see you guys again on the next Wellness Big Sister podcast episode.